All right, and welcome to this episode of Better Call Saul. Today, we're going to talk about what if there was no offer of compensation in the MLS? And Rachel, I feel like but yeah, I can see you
Right.
talking
Well,
already.
right now it's not even an option. So if I want to put something in my MLS, the whole point of that is to be used as a vehicle to offer compensation and expose the listing.
That's what
So
the
as it
MLS
stands
is
right
for.
now, if I wanted to put a listing in the MLS, I have to offer something.
Yeah,
Now, it could be $1, it could be a chicken, it doesn't matter. I have to offer something.
the MLS is an offer of, it's there to have the
Its
offer of
role,
compensation. Yeah.
right? Its role is an offer of compensation, right?
So Rachel and I are talking to Saul, and Saul, of course, is going to create some context for us. So, Saul,
Yes.
why are we talking about this?
Well, first of all, this whole thing called an MLS, it's a great thing. It's allowed for the greatest, the freest markets in real estate, unbelievable benefits to everybody involved. And nonetheless, it might be breaking the law, right? It doesn't
It
matter.
feels like it should be it should be a marketing vehicle, not an offer of compensation. How did it even get there?
I would agree with that.
There is a long history about when the Department of Justice decided that service businesses were fair game for antitrust. It was in the 50s sometime. Before that, it was like, trains, and, all the big industry, right? But then in the 50s, 60s, the personal services and service industries became a target. And so it's been going on for a while. And because whenever you bring competitors together to work together, that's like, that you got to be real careful when you do that, right?
Right.
So what you got, and you've got all these competitors working together. So
you could create a conspiracy.
Yeah, and you could create it without even trying.
Right.
And that's all, right? That it doesn't matter whether you tried or not. What matters is the result. And so over the years, it's evolved. And at one time, when I first started selling real estate, the pillar of MLS, and MLS is what everybody thought was the greatest value because nobody knew what was for sale except the realtors because they had the MLS.
Yeah.
And what held the MLS together was something called a unilateral offer of subagency. A unilateral offer of subagency, which meant if you get a listing and I'm a member of the MLS and you're a member, I represent the seller just like you do.
Right, because everybody represented the seller then.
Right.
And then we got agency disclosure in the 80s, and in 1992 about there needed to be a change, another change, antitrust, there needed to be a change in this unilateral offer of subagency, because now we started to have to disclose who we were in agents. So the model rules and NAR has model MLS rules, and if associations that own MLSs, if they comply with those model rules, they get errors and omission insurance, or to a degree. So they want to be able to comply with those rules. So there was an issue with this offer of agency.
I'm sorry, can I go back real quick? So when everybody represented the seller and the agreement was signed with the seller that we're going to sell your property, but everybody represents you, was the MLS at that time still focused on it being the offer of compensation being in there?
Was the offer of compensation was secondary, came with the offer of the agency. So the compensation came with it. And what they did in 92 is they separated it. They said no longer is an MLS a unilateral offer of subagency. They're going to eliminate that. It's going to become an offer of compensation. So that was the remedy in 92 to the new laws that we refer to as agency disclosure. Right. So then we had that.
At that time, did compensation change at all? Or did it stay basically the same? Like, I would think at that time, then it was like, okay, I'm your agent. This is what I charge. Do you want to hire me? Yes or no? And then if you have the buyer agency, it would be the same. Like, I'm your agent. This is what I charge. Do you want to hire me? Yes or no? But that doesn't seem like that's what happened.
Well, it didn't work that way, because the way that it worked was the listing agent would take the listing, and the compensation would be set up through the listing agent. And the listing agent would then put it in the MLS and would then pay the compensation, which pretty
Right.
much everybody knew what that was, at least in a range. And and we used to put it in there, the amount that the buyer agent got. But then we were advised over the years by
But that's
attorneys, don't
why, like, why? That doesn't even make sense.
well, so the attorney said, don't do that because that looks like you're colluding with one another. You're all telling one another what the buyer agent. So,
Right.
so we took it out, but then they tell us recently it needs to go back in
Right.
for transparency. So the MLS changed to an offer of compensation. So imagine if you, and I've had clients like this, we used to call these pocket listings, by the way, where I know I don't have a contract, but I know the seller will sell the property
Yeah.
if I bring them a buyer.
Right.
Right. And I'm not going to go tell everybody about it because I'm not going to, if somebody else sells it, I'm not going to get paid.
Right.
And I have no due, right? So this offer of compensation, the way that the MLS is structured, the ability to refute that is there, but nobody knew about it. So go back to this case, what it was saying was because it changed, it was an offer of compensation. I mean, again, if I had
What was it
a buyer
before? Just marketing?
if I had a buyer or a seller and there was nothing that guaranteed me to get paid, I would be taking a chance. As a matter of fact, I'd want to make sure I got paid some way. And
Are you
if
talking
I'm
about a
member of
buyer
the
agreement?
if I'm a member of the MLS, I don't have to worry about it, right?
Okay.
Unless because the MLS has got this thing that says you got to offer compensation to a buyer side.
Okay.
Oh, okay. All I got, if I know that those people, if I join that club, then I know I'm going to get paid because part of the rule is
Right. The rule is in order to
you gotta
use that,
pay me.
You
And
you got to
have
put
to.
you got to
what
put the
the
payment in
plaintiff
there.
is saying, that rule shouldn't be. You shouldn't have to force, if somebody wants to pay a buyer agent, they should have the right to pay or not to pay. But the seller shouldn't have to do that. Your whole thing is structured to force people to pay a buyer's agent. And while the consumer might get great service for that, that's not the way it should be set up, and people should have the choice.
I actually disagree though, because I think that the seller would, I think if that were true, then for sale, people that sell their house on their own, where they don't have representation, they oftentimes do offer compensation for the buyer's agent to bring a buyer.
They do, but they don't offer the full boat. So they offer one half, right? They're that savvy. They'll say, let's say the commission is typically 6%. They'll say, "I'll bring me a buyer, I'll pay you 3%. Bring me a buyer, I'll pay you 2%." Right.
But that's what the offer of compensation is. It's usually equivalent to whatever you would be asking, which is what's in the MLS.
So, but if they were saying to me, I would say one of two things. I would say to that owner, "Well, would you put that in writing?"
Yeah, for sure.
For sure,
Right.
100%.
And if they weren't willing to put it in writing, then I'd go to the buyer and I'd say to the buyer, "I'm going to show you properties that other people don't know are available.
Right.
But to do that, I want you to sign this contract and I'll represent you, etc." Right.
Buyer.
And now I get a buyer contract.
Yeah. No, but
Right.
that's the point. And what I'm saying is I don't think that. So back up. Can you tell us about the case? We didn't
Yeah.
talk about
So
that.
now-
What happened?
So this is important. We're asked this question. What's the paradigm shift question?
Love
It's
it. My
currently
favorite question.
possible. And if it were impossible, it would fundamentally change the way you do business. What's currently possible, and if it were impossible, it would fundamentally change the way
Which
you do business.
removing the offer of compensation in the MLS is
That-
would change
that would
everything.
change everything. And do we really then have an MLS?
Well, I don't know. It did, but
They would have it would be a different role. It would be advertising.
You're jumping way ahead. You're asking Friday questions on Tuesday, right? We're not talking about that.
Okay.
We're just talking about taking out that one thing, right? If you just took out that one thing, would that change the way you do business? Well, it
Yeah.
better, because if it didn't, every buyer you take out, there's no guarantee you get paid. You'd be
Right.
really spinning your wheels, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so here's the question: what's currently possible, if we're impossible, fundamentally change the way you do business? What if the broker compensation clause were removed from the MLS rules? Well, that would change things. Okay, great. Guess what? There have been actually attempts to have that removed.
Yeah.
And those attempts are two civil cases. And then there's the DOJ, that's separate. Two civil cases. One is Mueller, the other is Setzer. And these cases have applied not only for damages, they've applied for class action certification, like to be able to get everybody in the world who's been harmed, everybody who's bought property in the last 8 years, I think, in the case of Setzer. So Setzer actually, and this is the big news, April 22nd, Setzer got class action certification. That means at least somebody believed that there was harm, that there were damages
enough people.
to enough people to indicate
So
that
that
there should be
means
class action status.
that means that a judge said that there, okay, enough people that were harmed, meaning sellers.
Meaning sellers who had to pay it. I don't know who would end up.
That
people,
didn't
there are
feel
gonna be
like
claims.
Okay,
right?
that didn't feel like they had a choice.
What? Yeah. So there's like, what is the overpayment? What if? So I'm going to make this up, right?
Right. How do you determine what the overpayment
What if the
is?
court
Because there
goes
is
in
no
and
standard.
says, yeah, what if the court goes in and says, okay, we just did an average in the country, and we
Right.
think the overpayment was $10,000 per transaction, and then they say, okay, here's a pool. You got to put up a pool, and then people can apply to the pool to get whatever the damages are that they think.
I just don't even understand how it got this far, because I operate in 2 different states, and in both of my states, the contracts say what it splits out the compensation. It has total compensation, and it has what part of that, if any, goes towards the cooperating agent.
The cooperating broker.
So
right.
they
bet
have
you
a
most-
choice. They signed it.
Yeah.
Right.
I
But the
bet you-
question becomes then when you have that conversation with your seller, well, okay, what do I pay? If this is what you're charging, that goes in the first blank. What am I paying the buyer's agent?
Right.
Well, what do you suggest? Well, here's what most people pay, and it's X, but you can pay whatever you want. And then the seller is in a position where they feel like, well, if I pay less than that, is something going to happen to me? And I think that's where maybe that damage comes in.
That's not how I have the conversation.
Well, so yeah, but see, that's you, right? And so you got to look at this real fundamentally, and that's to say there is this clause that says you must pay $1.
Because the MLS,
because it's in the MLS, so it says you must pay $1. So that's it. And if everybody elected not to pay the $1,
then you have no MLS.
Yeah, so people would have to pay the $1. Even if that's what it was, if they had to pay it, then that's $1 too many that had to get paid. There was an overcharge because you had this rule that set a minimum, and it forced it. And the question is, how big is that? How many people really have been damaged to what degree? It's not right.
I don't even know how you could even.
Well, it's happened. It's happened. These class action suits happen all the time. I mean, people make all the money are the attorneys. You get this big envelope thing. Says, did you buy this between this period of time and this period? Right. And you go through it and check, and then you send it in and you get 3 cents, and the attorneys make all the money.
Right.
But it's trouble. So here's what happened is the next hurdle for the plaintiffs and for all the big attorneys that are signing up for this, all the big law firms that like did the tobacco, right? They're all like, for that, the next step for them was to get certified for class action.
Yeah, that's a big step. Yeah.
That's what happened. So now that means it's closer to eliminating, whether or not, so it might eliminate MLS, but just eliminating the offer of compensation. If that compensation is not guaranteed, how will you, as a practicing real estate professional today, how will you guarantee your compensation absent that current safety net that's there? And why this is not an exercise, just an intellectual exercise, right?
Right. No, it's happening
now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and what is I mean, I think you have to then get a buyer agreement, right?
Right. Well, Jennifer, so when you said that's not how I have the conversation with a seller when you're talking about how the commission breaks down, how do you have that conversation with them when you're talking about filling in those blanks and here's what you're being charged, here's what I charge.
Yeah, here's what we charge. And then we often just split that with the other agent to encourage them to bring their buyers. That's it.
Okay.
But think about this in today's marketplace. Forget the anomalies. In today's marketplace, property sells, I hear it all the time, sells like that.
Right.
We put an ad in the paper, we put up a sign, we've got 100 people lined up around the block, we get 20 offers, they're all over.
Finding the buyer is not what they're hiring us for right now. We can find 15 of them.
So why should we pay a buyer broker a big commission? What if
Right.
I'm really consulting a seller, I say, here's for me, it's going to cost you this.
Mhm.
Now we're going to have to offer it to other people in this marketplace. You know what? It's easy to find people that have buyers, so we don't need to offer as much on the buy. So let's offer $500 on the buy side. And that's a legitimate conversation. You'd get run out of
Absolutely.
town on a rail if people heard you saying that, right? But that's the truth. That's the honest conversation that should take place.
Absolutely. Right. Right. And when you look at, if someone's buying something or interviewing someone for a service or spending any money at any point, why don't they have a say in why don't they have a say in what they're having to pay out? Why is it, well, this is how it's always been done, so this is what I have to keep doing?
But then also what happens next, right? So you reduce the offer of compensation on the buy side. So then either the buyer's agents, they either get a buyer agreement
Less.
signed, or they either get less, they get an agreement signed, and then they collect the difference from the buyer, right?
Right. Right.
Or you have agents that are traditionally buyers agents no longer work with buyers. So then those buyers are going directly to the sellers, and you have a handful of states and a handful of people that don't do dual agency. So then the buyer becomes completely unrepresented.
It's the buyer's choice, though. If the buyer wants to be unrepresented, they can. If they want to be represented,
They
there's
can be
nothing that stops them
unrepresented
from getting it.
now, right?
Absolutely. Right. So if a buyer comes to me and says, hey, I don't want an agent, I don't need one, I'm going to come to you because I'm going to get a deal or whatever it might be, that's fine. I can facilitate their half of the transaction and not represent them.
You mean
And
I'm
it's
gonna
happening.
save
It's happening now.
I'm
No,
gonna
I
save
have 'em go to
$20,000 if I don't have another person, and I'd say I'm willing to save the $20,000. I mean, a lot of people
But
would
that's
opt for
not
that.
what happens though.
But that's
Because
right. And
I
that,
don't represent
because your listing
them.
agreement is already signed with the seller before that buyer even enters the picture. So that agreement with the seller, it is what it is. That
Yeah.
buyer, just because they're coming in unrepresented, doesn't mean that they're getting a deal.
Right.
If they are, you've got to list it as a variable rate commission and then have that conversation.
But if it's
Yeah,
not a
but,
variable rate, then they're absolutely not getting a deal. They're just being unrepresented.
Exactly.
And they
Yeah,
might have to pay an
hey,
attorney.
I think being represented is overstated.
What do you mean? We're gonna fight.
Yeah, I think that the service that some real estate professionals deliver for the cost that they charge for it is outrageous, and it's a rip.
100% agree. But
Totally.
that issue is that the barrier to entry to real estate is way too low. And we are the only cold call commission sales that if you never sell anything, you get to keep your job. That's
Yeah.
ridiculous. There's
Yeah.
no
Well,
standard.
think
Wait a
about
minute,
this,
that's
too,
another
though.
story. That's another. That's
You got
right.
a
So
combination of
that's
that
another-
going on.
That's another paradigm shift, right?
Right.
So the paradigm shift we're talking about now is
Look
the thing
who's
that's-
reining us in. It's usually the other way around.
the thing that's
Go ahead.
impossible, or
Yes.
the thing that today is possible that might be impossible, that you and I, we all know that if this happened, this is something that would force change in people's business habits.
They would have to get the buyer agreement and the MLS would have to change its identity, which I don't even understand why they are offer of compensation. They should be a marketing engine. That's
Because
what
It should. That's all it should be. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
because
that's
it's evolved.
it.
Because
It's a digital
I know.
newspaper. That's
maybe
it.
so it's evolved over the years, and the thing that people have been banking on for a number of years now is the fact that I'm going to get paid, and I'm pretty sure what I'm going to get paid if I sell this property, and I don't need to get somebody to sign a contract with me. And all I
Right.
got to do is, right? I mean, that's been the value, is that there's this
Right.
offer of compensation.
It allows you to work without a buyer agency agreement and still
It
make on
allows
getting
you to work
paid.
without a buyer agency.
Right.
And
Right.
then that's baked into the financing, right? I mean, there's just because it goes, and they say, what if the decision is yes, that's a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, that pull that out, the NAR pulls it out. That doesn't mean there's a remedy sitting there waiting for it.
Right. No, it just
Right.
means it's that we're going to be doing nothing but filling out one-page documents talking about compensation between listing brokerages and buyer brokerages.
Well, so
It's gonna
this
be
is
a
the
hot
Wayne
mess of
Gretzky
paper.
thing, right? This is the Wayne Gretzky thing. This is when people, the progressive real estate agent and broker should be thinking about not where the puck is, but where the puck's going. And to say,
Yeah.
look, there's enough writing on the wall right now to think that one of the ways to guarantee my commission to the greatest degree possible in the future, if this paradigm shifts the way it's looking like it might shift through the courts,
Mhm.
is to start figuring out how to use buyer broker contracts in my business.
100%.
Right.
I
And so-
agree. But then you also have, okay, so let's say all of this changes and no longer does the seller have to offer any compensation to the buyer's agent. It's collected by the buyer's agent from the buyer. You have so many things that is affected by that, because most
Well, you're
buyers
gonna
are getting
see-
loans.
Well, you're going to see what you're going to see is the closing cost credit from, from the seller to the buyer on the contract becoming a common thing. The buyer is going to go in and place an offer, and it's going to say, I need a closing cost. I'm offering 150. I want a closing cost credit of $6,000, because we
Or
know
they'll
that that's got
add
to
it
go
to
towards
the
their
price.
right.
Right.
And then but then look what that does when you talk about appraisal issues.
Exactly.
We all know
exactly
what
I was
kind of
gonna say.
issues we have, unless it becomes commonplace that a closing cost credit compared to the sale price of the property is within 2 to 3% or whatever it might be, then it's kind of ignored.
But I
that's
think
going to
what
be a
will-
change in appraisals and everything else.
I think we'll have more unrepresented buyers.
Right. Well, but
Sure.
buyers also know everything. So, well,
They got
they
their
always call you and
Well,
go,
so,
oh
you
yeah,
know,
well,
so
it's
part
good.
of-
I already,
so
I
then-
can represent myself.
So then,
Cool.
so then the messaging of real estate professionals needs to change.
Mhm.
And real estate professionals have to start thinking about themselves as consultants,
Yes.
right? That the niche is you're really a consultant, and that you got value, and you put the text into context for people,
Yeah.
because you know about data and you know about information, and you can make this all work for them because and they don't, right? And so this ask a realtor.
Yeah.
Ask a realtor, because you've figured it out and you know how to use the tools, and so there's an opportunity here with
Mhm.
this, because there's going to be a transition.
Right.
And what if the plaintiff is not successful? But it looks like they're moving in that direction. There'll be some
Right.
kind of compromise of some sort.
Which
There'll be
just makes
something.
that snowball bigger for the case of the DOJ
Right.
against the NAR.
Yeah, so there's like 3 to 5 years worth of litigation here, right? So
Right,
in the
right.
meantime, though, it
Hey,
gives
in the meantime, get all your passive income 3 to 5 years and get the hell out. No, I'm just kidding.
and look at
Choice.
private property rights and what's
Yeah.
happening to those, and do I really want to own real estate, right? You get into that whole
Yeah.
which
That's
takes
true.
us
Right. Go
into
down the
next-
rabbit hole.
the next piece, which is, before we go, we should talk about just a little bit, and that is that inflation, and there's different types of inflation, but inflation is up. And when inflation is up, typically for what we're looking at, it means there's too many dollars, there's too much currency in play and credit. And one way to reduce the demand for things is reduce the money supply and credit. And the way you do that is you raise interest rates. So that's what we're seeing in the marketplace today. We're seeing inflation is high, and the way to curb that is to increase interest rates. And there's a lot of things that come to bear here, but we've already seen the ratcheting up of interest rates. We're going to continue to see that. And every time the rates ratchet up a little bit, what happens is X number of people are no longer qualified, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Right. So every time a little bit, boom, so it becomes really important for the real estate professional to pay close attention to this, to understand how this works, to understand that this is cyclical, that there is this inflation, and it's going to continue for some period of time. And right now, the increases in interest rates aren't going to slow down the marketplace so much as increase the urgency that people have
Mhm.
Right.
to get
Right.
in right away. Right. So,
But also this coupled with high rent and not really a lot of availability for rentals, it's a huge
Right.
problem for
And
people
plus
whose
people
numbers
working
are tight.
plus people working at home now, right? There's lots of stuff going on right now.
There's a lot of stuff there's a lot of stuff in the pot, and trying to figure out how to fix or address all those things. Yeah, with limited inventory, limited affordability, and the fact that rents are almost as much, if not more, sometimes than a mortgage payment.
They're more.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, where I'm at, they're more.
Yeah, so that's a supply and demand, and we know that there's been for years now. It doesn't matter what property is zoned; people can stop the use of a property just by getting together and being against what the owner of the property wants to build there, right? So that's been going on for years, and so we haven't been able to keep up with housing supply, and so we're way behind, 6-7 million units behind. It takes a long time to catch up.
Yeah.
And interest rates are still affordable for some people. So the market's not going to die all of a sudden. But what some people are worried about, a recession next year, because as the Fed starts to pull money out by increasing interest rates, so increase interest rate, fewer people borrow, so less money. As that starts to happen, then there'll be less demand. Then there might be, the job market might slow. You know, there's all kinds of
There's all these
repercussions
things,
that
right?
come from this. But as a realtor, you need to look for the opportunity. And so I look for, what parts of the way that we're going to solve the housing affordability issue is higher density.
Yeah.
That's the way we're going to. So if I were selling real estate,
But
I'd
if
look.
you have higher density, you also have like a utility issue and this drain
you
on.
have to address that. But there's a lot of money that's already been pumped into the pipeline to address just those kinds of issues. So now if I'm selling real estate like 1979, 1980, when there was a big recession, I'm looking for properties that have a house on it that are zoned to allow me to put more units on it. I'm looking for opportunities to make the property through improvement more valuable, and looking for groups of people, friends and neighbors and relatives that might be interested in doing this with me, because I don't have enough money to do it myself. I'm looking for the areas where where the federal money is going to come down, so they're going to be able to pave the street. They're going to be able to fix up the bus stops and the pergolas and and paint the sidewalks and all that stuff to make the commercial district prettier and nicer.
Right.
And that. So that's what. So the real estate's a business, and so a lot of people look at real estate sales, and real estate sales is like an occupation.
Yeah.
But real estate as a business is more than just real estate sales.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Right. And it's being involved in all these other things that we've talked about, including owning the real estate. You own a piece of real estate, you rent it out, that's a business.
Right.
Right.
That single family home, that condo that you own and rent out, that's a business. And so to me, always being in the real estate business meant that we did a number of things. As a matter of fact, got to where I got tired of having to sell it to somebody else and go through all that stuff with them. And then they ended up with the prize. To suffer through all that stuff and they end up with the prize. I'm thinking, if I'm going to suffer through all this, I want
the prize.
You want the prize too.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Okay. So our original question was, what if there was no offer of compensation in the MLS?
Yeah. How would that change your business?
Well, here's
What's
a question for you too.
Or impossible? How would that change your business?
Right. So here's a question, and I don't know if you guys are seeing this in your market at all, but in my market, we have, and it's happened to me a couple times just this year, where you have non-member licensees. So they're not realtors because they're not members of anything. They're licensees with self-sponsoring. And they call and say, hey, you know what? I want to show your listing at blah, blah, blah. I'm not a member of the MLS. They have to negotiate their compensation prior to walking in the door of that property. Our listing agreements now also have an additional paragraph that they've added recently that says to the seller, after the compensation that we talk about, do you want to allow non-members of your MLS to show your property? And if you mark yes to this, you are not subject to pay them the compensation noted in paragraph whatever. You can negotiate it on the fly. Are you guys seeing that in your market too, where you have non-members of the MLS calling to show you? They're using home search apps like the rest of the public does, Zillow, Redfin, whatever they're using.
Snap.
Right, they're using all these things to source properties for their buyers, but they're not a member, so they have to negotiate
because the MLS is sending out so many IDX fees everywhere, which is pros and cons, right?
It almost doesn't. Right, it's what's
I'm
the
not
point
seeing
at that
that
point?
too much, but I can see how it.
I've had that happen a couple times this year, and oddly enough, none of them negotiated their compensation before scheduling the appointment. Which means that if they scheduled the appointment, showed the property, and their buyer liked it, we would have had to pay $0. So
unless, because they can't. Well, wait, they're not upheld to the code of ethics, right? So if that were to happen and they said no, it is contingent. My compensation is contingent on this offer. The offer will be pulled if you don't pay me. They're allowed. I mean, they can do that. They're not upheld to the
I suppose if they wanted to, right. But my seller, from a listing agreement standpoint, my seller, there was no offer of compensation made. Therefore, I don't have to pay you anything.
So
And
in
the
that
onus is on that,
case,
non-member to say, I would like to show this property. And by the way, I'm not a member. What is the cooperative compensation being offered? And then there's a form for that, like there is for everything.
That's where you got to be careful of like illegal tying,
Right.
yeah,
right? Because they
which
say,
we've
well,
talked about before. People should go
yeah.
back and watch that video.
Right.
So back to this antitrust thing, right? So antitrust, people don't like to talk about commissions, but the fact is, if the rules change, it can dramatically change the way people do business and have been doing
Right.
business for years. And we're on
And
the
that's going to be a
precipice.
lot of conversations about compensation then.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And that's where we are today. But it's still an opportunity for people to like get this early. And there already are people who for years have been using buyer broker contracts, which by the way are not the same thing as a disclosure agreement, right?
Right.
A lot of people
Right.
think of disclosure agreements and buyer broker. So these are two different things. And
Right.
so you want this contract, we used to call it an exclusive authorization to locate property.
I like it. Yeah,
That's what
that's
it was.
perfect.
It was an exclusive authorization to locate property form. And so you were representing the buyer and you had it in contract and you had the commit, it was set up so that if you earn commission from another source, you write it would be. And so, but a lot of people don't use that. You know, Rachel, you do, Jennifer, you do, but
Right.
most agents do
Most
not.
don't.
We talked about
Right.
this. I think the percentage is less than 10%.
Right.
Right.
Oh, I'm sure. Way less.
But they take away that offer to
But
compensation.
if you're only
It's gonna
focused on the commission,
It's going to be a lot more than that.
Yeah. If you're only focused on the commission, then it feels like it can also get in the way of truly helping the
can't.
client,
Like
right?
I was going to
Right.
say that really that's a dilemma. Whether or not someone's a member of my MLS, if my duty is to try to sell that property, and whether or not it's a member of the MLS or not, I make the same amount of money.
Right.
Right.
Then why wouldn't I cooperate?
That's what I would think too.
Well, and
right.
that's my conversation. That's my conversation with the seller. When we get to that point, I feel like the listing agreements, while they are a lot more detailed and cover a lot more things now, there's a lot more kind of behind the counter talk that you have to try and educate the seller as you're going through it. So it's taking that 2-sentence line of the listing agreement ends up being a 20-minute conversation because they're like, well, wait a minute, what do you mean they're not a member of the MLS? How would that happen? I don't want to let somebody who's not a member in. I said, well, hold up. Yeah, you do. They're licensed, they're insured, they're working with the brokerage. The only thing is they're not paying for the database that we're using that offers the compensation. So why would you eliminate that person?
Yeah.
Chances are they're going to call and schedule an appointment and not negotiate their own compensation. So you might be saving yourself some money anyway.
Yeah.
You know,
It's crazy. I don't know.
It really is.
Any
It really
final
is.
thoughts?
No,
And
I think people need to start looking at buyer broker contracts if they
Yeah.
haven't already. And I mean more than look at. I mean, I start to
Learn
read
it.
talk to people who
Yeah.
are using it. You know,
But I
pros
think
and
this
cons.
is the first step to moving towards being a consultant, right? You have this
Absolutely.
conversation as part of like the interview process of do we think that we can work together? Can I help you based on what you need and your schedule and what you want? Are you willing to work with me based on what I can do for you, what I charge, like all this stuff, right? So then you agree and it's like, okay, well, now that we agree, let's write it out to make sure we really agree. Let's all sign it. And now let me work for you.
Yeah.
And then we'll check in like, is it working? Yes or no? You know what I mean?
Right. It's a different conversation that agents are going to start having to have with their clients.
It's a more professional conversation. So I think
Right.
it raises the
the bar.
professionalism in the community, you know?
It's going to force agents to have those conversations with their clients that they should have been having for the last how many years, but they haven't been having.
Yeah. I also think, there you go.
Secrets of a lucrative real. This is old, right? But this is all about representing buyers in real estate transactions.
Interesting. It's
Yeah.
so interesting. It's going to be fun to watch it happen. Get your popcorn
Right.
ready.
Right. No kidding.
We have a new popcorn place called Owl's Popcorn. They have all these different flavors. So good. Like they have like everything bagel and strawberry and white
Right,
chocolate.
yeah.
Oh, I'll send you guys some.
That's a lot.
So good. All right. Well, Rachel, if people have a referral for you, you do business in Chicago. What is
I do.
the best way to get a hold of you?
Best way to reach me is by cell phone at 630-542-8688 or at rreal@dealwithreal.com.
All right. And Saul, if people want some more context, they want to better understand like the history of things, the data, everything around it, what's the best way to get a hold of you or some good resources?
The easiest way to get a hold of me is Saul, S-A-U-L, at bettercallsaul.realtor. Saul at bettercallsaul.realtor. Go to thedataadvocate.com, thedataadvocate.com. It's got every day more and more stuff. It's looking good. We're loving it.
And your Facebook pages.
And Real Talk is our group on Facebook. It's Real Towns Real Talk. And we've got a group there, about 5,000 people who've been together for a long time. So come join us.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Good to see
you.
you.
Bye.